Well, welcome everybody to tonight's second Thursday of the month program. We're going to be continuing on things. We had a little bump last month when we had Thursdays that didn't work, and so we rescheduled it for December. I should have said November, then December, and lo and behold, Kimball Jenkins did not have us on the schedule, and they were having an open house fundraiser. And lo and behold, I'm going along thinking things are just wonderful. And 2 days ahead, I came by and said, well, we're looking forward to seeing you on Thursday night. And they looked at me and said, what Thursday night? And so here we are. And Patrick is the unfortunate person who got switched in the middle of all of that. But you now have the advantage of having him here and in person, and he's willing to answer questions. So I'm very happy to welcome the president of New Hampshire Technical Institute, Patrick Tompkins. And Patrick, your organization has been part of our community my whole life.
Your whole life.
And what a tremendous addition it was and still is. So please tell us a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
Thank
you
you
very, very much. Yeah, and I think it's, for this organization, it's just great to have an opportunity to talk about that history and the key role that the college has played. First, I want to thank Jim. When I come to Concord in 2023, I met with Tim Sink, the chair of the CEO of the chamber, and I said, Tim, who do I need to meet? And he said, Jim Milliken. You're one of the first people he told me to meet, and Jim was very, very, very kind to me, told me about his love of Concord and why I should love Concord, and he also told me how to get involved in the community. And he said, Patrick, you're a member of the chamber, and when you do the business after hours and the business before hours, that day they're going to send you a list of who's going to attend. And he said, and you go down that list and you pick 3 names, and those are 3 people that you try to meet that night. And what was so helpful about that is not only did it help me be kind of strategic and to meet folks, but when you're a newcomer to a new community and you don't know anyone, that's a very uncomfortable situation. And when you're walking into a room like the business after hours where everybody knows each other and you're the only person in the room that doesn't know anyone, Jim gives me a strategy, right? Like I got 3 people that I can walk up to, you know, I could ask the chamber, like, where's this person, where's that person, get to meet them and then build my network. So thank you very much for that, Jim. Before I get into the presentation, just real quick, a little bit about me so that you have some context on that. So I started at NHTI as the president in January of 2023 and came here from Virginia, lived there for 30 years or something like that, and spent most of my career working in community colleges. And so I think this is my 4th one, couldn't keep a job, obviously. But very, very glad to be at NHTI. So let's jump in and I'll tell you a little bit about the history. And you can see here that we started there in 1965. And you'll see these slides are going to kind of repeat. Each decade we'll have a little clip of the major events, and then subsequent slides will go into a little bit of depth there. It's a little faded. See if we can make that work. That's a little better. Yeah. So one of the things I want to share with you, because I think it's really important, how old do you think 2-year colleges are in America? When do you think the first 2-year college in America was established? It's a good question, right? It's just one of those things we don't think about, right? You know, like if you went to a particular university, you might know the year that was founded. 1901, Joliet, Illinois, Joliet Junior College. And it was established to work with recent high school graduates who weren't quite ready for the university. And so it was a preparatory experience for them. And then it spreads. The growth is pretty slow until World War II. and the GI Bill in 1945, which gives every service person money to go back to school. Well, here's one of the things. We don't have enough places for them. And not all of those service people wanted a 4-year degree. Some of them wanted skills that they could put to work right away. Some of them wanted career technical education. And so there was a commission in 1945 called the Truman Commission looking at the future of democracy in America. And one of the conclusions of that commission is that all Americans would benefit from post-secondary education to get a skill, but also, as I said, important for the health of our democracy so that they would be educated, they would understand the civic nature of America and give those service people something to do and a goal. In the 1960s, on average, we built in America a new community college every week for 10 years. Think about that growth. Every week for 10 years in America, we build a new community college. One of them is NHTI. So NHTI comes out of the New Hampshire Technical Institute had 2 locations, one in Portsmouth and one in Manchester. And you can see in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, this is a national conversation about how are we going to meet the workforce needs because labor was becoming more skilled. So working in the factories, you needed people who actually had some education, had some knowledge. It was not just processing things on an assembly line, but you needed to be able to problem solve and to have skills. And so all across America, including New Hampshire, the question is, how are we going to meet the workforce needs? And that 2-year college movement comes along. In New Hampshire, they say, okay, we've got these technical institutes. They're not quite meeting the need. What we really need is we need a vocational 2-year strategy in New Hampshire. I'm told, and I don't have the documentation on this, so it might be folklore, but I'm told that the question was, where are we going to situate this 2-year college? And the argument was in Manchester. And I think what ended up happening was that the land was donated in Concord, and that's how NHTI ends up in Concord, which is really significant because up until 10 years ago, NHTI really is New Hampshire's community college. We have 7 of them, but NHTI is the community college. And if you want that quality education, if you want the 5-star experience, you go to NHTI. Now, in the last 10 years, our 6 sister colleges have really improved and grown and integrated with NHTI, and we're providing high-quality programs all across the state, including programs like culinary or automotive or welding that we don't offer at NHTI, but we offer at White Mountains and Great Bay and Lakes Region. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. George Strout, this guy is, he's a giant. He is a man who establishes the college. Imagine you have this blank canvas, you have this open landscape, you don't have faculty, you don't have infrastructure, you don't have bylaws, you don't have a board. Hey, George put this together, and he builds McCrory and Farnham, oversees the development of the college, and we name a building after George for that. Earl Little was a leader in New Hampshire's vocational movement, and again, another giant who really makes vocational education in New Hampshire, both at the high school level, but particularly in the post-secondary level, happen. And so that's why the building, our main hall, our first building, is named after Earl Little. So they established it in 1965, and this is going to be the flagship, and this is going to be where you're going to go for really high quality technical education. So it's more than a trade school. The vocational schools up to there are more trade schools. This is really college education, and some of these folks are going to go right into the workforce, highly skilled and highly educated, and some of them are going to go on to 4-year schools. Because NHTI in Concord is the only school that's offering that comprehensive education at that level, we're drawing students from all across New Hampshire, and they need a place to live. So they had to build dorms, and they built a male dorm. So the college starts with all men, and you can see this first graduating class. It's just kind of fun to look back in history. I counted it today, there's like 22 or 24 of them. This is supposed to be the first graduating class, but I met, which was in 1966. That's what it says down there at the bottom, 1966. We had our 60th anniversary here in the fall, and I met a gentleman, and he graduated in 65. And I said, so he was literally the first graduate. I said, how'd you graduate in 65? He had transferred credits in. So yeah, just a really cool story there. So NHTI pursues accreditation, and that's really important in terms of, here it'll talk about quality and reputation, but the third bullet's the most important. So in order to be eligible for federal financial aid, an institution has to be accredited by an organization that the federal government recognizes as an accrediting body. And so in New England, I forget what it was called, New England Association of Colleges and Secondary Schools, NEASC, it's now called NHTI, New England College and Higher Education Association. But that's the first accreditation. And again, that's really important because in NHTI and CCS and HO overall, about a third of our students receive federal financial aid. And in America, for community colleges and most colleges and universities, including the privates, if you don't have federal financial aid, you're going to close. You are dependent upon that revenue in order to stay open. And so that accreditation was a watershed for the college. In the 70s, we're going to go through this. We have growth in the facilities and growth in programming, and a new president, David Larrabee, who is the longest serving president at NHTI. So in 1970, McCrory Hall is open, and it was named after Elwood McCrory, who was an advocate for health education in New Hampshire. And that becomes the first foundational healthcare building at NHTI. So we opened with engineering technology programs in Little Hall, mechanical, electrical. Then in the 70s, we had computer engineering technology. But New Hampshire needs this skilled workforce in healthcare as well. And so these visionaries are looking at McCrory Hall and that building. And one of the things I reflect on as I go through this history, and the librarian Christy Cho at NHTI pulled all of this together, did this research and helped pull this together for me. And as I'm looking at it, I'm reflecting on the difference in the investment in that time in New Hampshire in community college education compared to today. You're going to see these buildings that are going to grow and emerge in a very short period of time, a number of buildings that were very expensive for that time. And that's all funded by the New Hampshire state government. That New Hampshire at that time was doing very, very well. It was growing in population and business was really booming. Later in the 80s, we're going to go through a recession and the population growth is going to slow, and that's going to put pressures on the budget in New Hampshire. And so the availability of funds for this massive, magnificent growth is going to lessen. So how fortunate we are that those investments were made at that time, and we're still using these buildings, including McCrory Hall. Farnham Hall is named after Paul Farnham, who was the education commissioner for New Hampshire in the 1960s, and that ended up becoming our library at one point. And right now, Farnham Hall, we share that with the University System of New Hampshire. So they had some property that they were leasing that was very expensive, and it was more square footage than they needed. And Governor Sununu had put together a commission and said, hey, community college system, university system, you all need to work together more, and you need to collaborate and integrate. And so one of the outcomes of that was to locate the University System of New Hampshire offices on our campus, because the community college system of New Hampshire offices are in the building right next door. And so it's worked out great. We weren't using that space productively. We had stuff in there, but we have more, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. We had more square footage than we needed, so that space was underutilized. It allowed us to utilize that space more effectively, and it solved a problem for the University System of New Hampshire. And it was a three-way investment. So the University System of New Hampshire invested in the renovation of that building, NHTI invested in it, and the Community College System of New Hampshire. So putting those three pots of money together, we were able to do a tremendous renovation of that facility, and we're really happy to have them on campus with us. David Larrabee is the longest serving president at NHTI. You can see him for 22 years, and you'll see in these following slides what David does to build the college. So Stroud Hall opens in '72 as the women's dormitory, right? So this is a different time in America. And so in 1965, we're not thinking about women in the workforce, right? And when we're thinking about women in the workforce, we're not thinking about them as skilled. But in the 70s, women are becoming more interested in higher education and more interested in the workforce, and they're interested in NHTI, and they start enrolling in NHTI, but we don't have any place for them to stay. And there's a couple of disadvantages there. I mentioned earlier that when we built the men's dorm, we're able to bring people from Berlin and Portsmouth and Keene, right? So they have access to education that they're not able to get in Littleton. That's true for the women, but because we didn't have the residence hall, the women had two choices: live in Concord or have a significant commute. So this is a major development. And then we mentioned that the first building is later named after George Stroud. So I'll talk a little bit about enrollment in a moment, but our enrollment has declined as it has across America. There's some demographic trends that are affecting that, and we have more residence halls than we need. So I start in 23, right, which is like in New Hampshire, that's kind of at the end of the pandemic. We're still coming out of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had a waiting list for our 3 residence halls. After the pandemic, we can't fill the 3 halls. So, and they're very expensive. We have campus safety, we have maintenance, we have the overhead, and so we closed down Stroud Hall in order to husband our resources. The New Hampshire Mountain Kings, Chris Brown, has this vision of a hockey academy, kind of this post-high school, pre-college, paraprofessional hockey academy, and these young men, and now women, come from all over America and all over the world to attend the New Hampshire Mountain Kings Hockey Academy. Chris rents the dorms from us. They use our dining facilities, and they take classes at Bishop Brady. So again, you see these partnerships. Athletics is really important at NHTI, and it's there from the beginning. Rob Kleiner works for Northeast Delta Dental. He's one of the great leaders at that institution, and he's on our board. And Rob says, I want you to meet my dad. And so we go to the Red Arrow, and I meet his dad, and his dad brings the yearbook. He brings his yearbook from 1965, and I can see the basketball team. And John Pratt is another early grad, and John's showing me, yeah, this kid did this, and this kid did that. And so athletics was important right from the foundation. And what's interesting and important about that is that NHTI is the only community college in New Hampshire that has a residential athletics program. So Great Bay has some athletics. They don't have dorms, and they don't have their own fields. They don't have a regulation gym. We have all of those facilities, and that enriches the student experience. So community colleges are known as, in my business, we call them PCP, parking lot, classroom, parking lot. So you drive in, you take your classes, you drive home. But there are students who want a richer experience, a fuller experience, and athletics is part of that. And later we'll talk about the growth in athletics and how that developed. And so here you can see the men's basketball in 2005 and 2020, national champions, and cross country in 2024 and 2025. We had Heather Searles. She was a national champion cross-country runner, and the last year Eli Lemire, national champion, and this year he came in second. So we have this really strong history, and here you see this legacy of excellence is what this slide says, and it mentions Paul Hogan. And NHTI hires Paul, and Bill Symington does, and he says, Paul, we got athletics, but we really need a program. And God bless Paul Hogan. He's working at Plymouth State University, and he comes to the NHTI, and he stays there for the rest of his career. And you can argue that Paul Hogan builds NHTI athletics. And when Paul retired, I just come here in 2023, and we had just raised money to relay the court in the gym. and we dedicated that as the Paul Hogan Court. And he's a great man. And Paul, if you're involved in athletics in New Hampshire, you know Paul. And if you're involved in athletics in New Hampshire, Paul knows you. And so what was great about that is Paul was able to recruit all from North Country and all throughout New Hampshire and really build a fine program. And Paul still has his basketball camps there during the February recess and in the summer. Paul is also in retirement. He's refereeing games. My boy plays for MV's middle school, and I'm out there going to the game, and here comes Paul trotting out on the field to referee. And Paul said the good thing about refereeing is he gets to be at home at nights, whereas when he was the athletic director, he didn't. I'm not sure how his wife feels about him being home at nights, but we'll leave that to her. In 1976, we were part of the bicentennial thrill, and a time capsule is buried, and it's going to be opened in 2076. So I've only got 51 years to wait. So here you're going to see some of the programs that were developed, and we've got continuing education. That's a really important one. So what we were offering were 2-year degree programs, associate degree programs, but there was a need for other education, and that became continuing education, and some of that is night school, what we used to call back in the day, night school, and some of it is people who are earning smaller certificates, or some of it are just people who want to learn a skill, right? Like a particular class where they learn a skill because of self-interest, because of hobby, or because it helps them upskill in their profession. We add architectural, which is really interesting. We're the only architectural 2-year school in New Hampshire. Dental hygiene, we are the only dental hygiene program in New Hampshire. If you get your teeth cleaned in New Hampshire, you ask the hygienist, she graduated from us, or she's not from New Hampshire. Or he, because we have gentlemen that are in that program now. Human services, mental health, the nursing degree program, the 2-year program, and now that program is at all 7 of the community colleges in New Hampshire. Paramedic, we have the only paramedic program, and rad tech. If you get an x-ray in New Hampshire and that person's from New Hampshire, they graduated from NHTI. I think that's really cool. And I'm one of those, I'm one of those guys, like I go in to get the x-ray and I say, so how did you get into this business? And they say, oh, I went to NHTI, or I had blood drawn and I'm just a pest, right? And I say to the phlebotomist, I said, oh, so, where did you get your education? She said, oh, NHTI. I said, oh, okay. And she was going back for rad tech and she's going to NHTI. My favorite story about that is I went to the, what I call the doc in the box, the urgent care around the corner from the college. And I'm getting my blood taken. And it's a young man, and he takes my blood. And after he takes my blood, I said, hey, how'd you get into this? And he said, oh, well, I was interested in it, so I went to NHTI, and I got my certificate in phlebotomy. I said, that's awesome. He said, yeah, I graduated last week. So I was glad I asked him that after he took my blood, right? Then before, he did a terrific job, and he couldn't say enough good things about his faculty, the instructor that he had that got him through there. So now we're in the 80s, and we have land, and we partner with Police Standards and Training so that they can build an academy on land that was owned by NHTI, and that partnership is really important because our students can take classes at the academy, and that'll count towards their criminal justice degree. And the cadets can come to NHTI and pursue criminal justice, and we give them credit for the work that they're doing at the academy. Sweeney Hall opens. We'll see that a little bit more. Langley Hall, another residence. There was a Sustainable Energy Ventures Club and more campus development. The subsequent slides will show that. So there's the Police Standards and Training, and that's if there's an officer in New Hampshire, they almost certainly graduated from Police Standards and Training, and they do a fine job at that. That is an institution that New Hampshire should be really, really proud of. The quality of officers that they put out, the quality of the education, and above all, the quality of the ethics and the integrity that they instill in these mostly young people. So there's Sweeney Hall in 1985, and it was named after Edward Sweeney, who helped establish the State Advisory Committee on Vocational Technical Education. And that building's going to expand in the future. North Hall, which is now called Langley Hall, is opened in 1989. Langley Hall is named after Pam Langley. She was a faculty member and a department chair and then vice president of the college for a long time, and just absolutely beloved person. She's still around and she still advises me, which is very generous of her. So you can see that we're growing. We start with what is now called Strout, we add South for the women, and then we add Langley in the 1980s. Interestingly to me, South and Strout are pretty long in the tooth. There's asbestos there, right? Like, so renovation presents some challenges. Langley is built much later, and yet Langley's at the same end of life as South and Strout. And I learned this from a developer who said, Patrick, let me tell you about your buildings. And what he told me was Langley was one of the early design build movements. So that's where the firm designs the building and builds it. And what he told me was they weren't very good at it at that time. So the building is structurally sound, but it wasn't really built to last for 50, 60 years. And so we'll be facing that in the future. How do we upgrade and renovate that? But it's our newest building, and so in many ways it's the most comfortable because it's more modern than the others. This is a really interesting shot here. So this is Little Hall. That's the first building. And then this is the cafeteria. So here's the parking lot in front of Little, and that parking lot doesn't exist anymore. This part of the parking lot exists. And actually, I got that backwards because it's the shot is from the other angle. This is closer to the highway. This is the parking lot that's closer to the highway, and we filled that in with some buildings. And then here's McCrory, and there's Farnham up here. So here you can't see it too well, but that's a baseball diamond up there. And what's going to happen is we're going to build a quad here, and Langley Hall is going to go over here, the Police Standards and Training is going to go here, and the McAuliffe-Shepard Discovery Center is going to go here. And over here are cornfields that are in the floodplain. And in our 60th reunion, you know, we bring people back, and they came from every decade of the college, and they tell me stories. And one guy tells me that he was an RA, he was a resident assistant, and he said that the kids would take the kegs out into the cornfield, and then when they would harvest the corn, they would find these kegs in the fields, right? So, right, kids, that's what they do. So that guy, really interesting story too. So he tells me, he said, yeah, he said, I had a good time there. I enjoyed being an RA. It was beneficial to me. And he said, I didn't really have too many problems with the residents. He said, you know, because I tried to understand what they were doing and you know, try to respect them a little bit. And he said, you know, you had people who were drinking and people who were smoking pot. And he said, I tried to not get too involved in that. He said, but if I went in the room and I saw pot, you know, like I had to do something about it. He said, and then we're talking for a little bit, and about 10 minutes later, he says, yeah, you know, one time, he said, my car caught on fire. He said, I don't know how that happened. The police come to my door, they knock on my door, and they say, your car's on fire. And he says, what, my car's on fire? And they said, yeah, and his mom and dad are there because, and he was from north, like Tilton, some area like that. So he's like, how did they get there first? Well, the car was registered in the parents' name. They call the parents, this car's on fire. They come down there. Now, for me, I think about that earlier story where he's telling me busting kids for pot and then the car catching on fire. I'm not saying they're related, but one wonders, right? So now we're into the 90s, our 25th anniversary, McAuliffe-Shepard. Talk a little bit about the eye, the NHTI project, which is fascinating, an archaeological project. The Wellness Center opens, and then Bill Symington is appointed the president of NHTI. So we have the 25th anniversary, and then the McAuliffe-Shepard Discovery Center opens. And some of you know Jean Goroskis, is that how you say her last name? Which she was just a force, right? She was a force, and she builds that place. And Jean was this type of person, you just couldn't say no to her because she wouldn't let you go. You know, she would just like, so she gave me a tour there, you know, and she'd say, oh yeah, so this interior of the space capsule, I got that donated from so-and-so. I went and I saw it and I was like, you need to donate that. And they were like, no. And then I just kept calling them and calling them and calling them. And I think finally just to get rid of her, right, they did it. And look what she built. She built a really, really important cultural amenity for us in Concord. And it starts out at the Shepherd Discovery Center, right? And then it gets renamed as the McAuliffe Shepherd Discovery Center. I think it was
Was the McAuliffe further?
it was reversed?
I think it was written in McAuliffe.
Okay. And then they added Shepherd later? Okay. I didn't know that. And Jean, it was originally a state-supported institution, and then it became one where she had a board and she had to raise a lot of money, and she was really good. And the new director, Melissa, is wonderful, a great successor for Jean. But wow, to come into that organization that Jean had built, that's a pretty good gig. I want to slow down here for the I, New Hampshire's NHTI's literary journal, started in 1991. And the reason this is important is it's probably one of the oldest continuous literary journals at a community college in America. It is hard to sustain a student organization at a community college because unlike a university where people are there for 4 years and the first years come in, right, and you can recruit them and you can orient them and you can develop them in their sophomore year, and then you can have them as junior officers in their junior year, and then in the senior year they can lead the organization. Our students cycle through much more quickly, and so an organization like the Literary Magazine is one that's really people-driven. And you'll get a student who has a lot of energy or a group of students who have a lot of energy and they're like, yeah, let's do this. And a faculty member who's got a lot of energy, this will be great. And then that faculty member retires or the students graduate and those things sometimes go away. And even through the pandemic, the I continued to publish. I'm really impressed and proud that we have that literary journal today. So the NHTI project, I showed you that bottom land, the cornfields, and I showed you the baseball field and all that. So this is Abenaki land. And at this time when we're going to develop that land, there are requirements to do archaeological digs and find out what was there. And they found all kinds of really interesting things. We know that approximately 800 to 1200, I think it was, that area was pretty heavily used as probably a temporary camp for the Abenaki because it was floodplain, right? And so they found plenty of artifacts there, and they also found some human remains that are from the Abenaki. And not sure really, it wasn't a cemetery, so we don't really know exactly why they were there, but important to honor that history. The Goldie Crocker Wellness Center is a real game changer for NHTI, and so that's where our gym is. And we have a fitness facility upstairs, and we have a student center, and in a way, that's kind of the beating heart of the campus, named after Goldie Crocker. So she had a PhD, and she was working at a university, probably tells me here which university where she worked, and Bill Symington convinces her to come to NHTI and start a new program, right? Why would she do that? Because it's a pretty cool opportunity. Hey, come on here. We don't have this. You can build something that has never existed before. And Goldie had a passion for health and wellness, and so appropriately, we named the Wellness Center after her. And if you go into our gym, in the entrance, you'll see right above the entrance, it'll say Goldie Crocker Wellness Center. So there's Bill Symington. He's the president in '96. Came up through, and he did many, many important things. One of them is hiring Paul Hogan as our athletic director, which really becomes a seminal moment. And all of what we have in athletics, we can attribute to what Paul developed. And now our charge is to take what Paul did and take it into the next decades. And we have Annie Matarazzo, Concord native. Her family is a Concord family. They darn near owned Manchester Street up there on the hill, and she was a great athlete. Her brother was a great basketball player, played overseas, and we stole her from Bishop Brady, and she's coming now and she's rebuilding that program, and we're really blessed to have somebody of Annie's quality in terms of her energy and her vision, but above all, this is what Annie and I share, her values. That's where we start. Athletics is all about values. It's not about winning games. That's important. It's not about having fun. That's important too. It's about what kind of young women and young men are we developing to become members of our community, members of our society. So in the 2000s, we're going to talk about the Child Development Center, the Learning Commons. Lynn Kilchenstein is the next president, and the establishment of the Community College System of New Hampshire. Sycamore Garden, great story there. Grapponi Hall, which is our nursing program, and some more program development. So here's the Mary Stuart Gile Child and Family Learning Center. Mary Stuart Gile built our early childhood education program, and again, just one of these revered figures who was another giant in Concord. You know, maybe we don't always recognize these folks, right? Because they're not the governor, you know, they're not the admiral or something, but what they do for our community and our society is tremendous. And so she builds this incredibly high quality early childhood care center and program, which still exists today. We have the largest early childhood education program in New Hampshire, and many of the certified providers in New Hampshire are coming out of there. We ran that center for a number of years, but there was a problem. And the problem is that's not our core competency. Running a child care center is not our core competency. And so we were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on that, and it just was unsustainable. So we had to close it, and that was hugely controversial. I understand there were letters to the editors and political ruckus around it, but the Boys and Girls Club of Central New Hampshire comes in and rescues that center and rescues us. And Chris Eman, who is the director, and Ross, who leads that center, who's a graduate of our program. That is a very, very, very fine child care center. It's run very, very well. They do it much better than we ever could. So it was a painful transition. It was the right thing for NHTI and the right thing for New Hampshire, and especially with the Boys and Girls Club. So there's the Learning Center Commons, and you can see this is the clock tower up there. And that's where we have our library and tutoring and advising and beautiful building inside there. And you can see this is probably the first shot that we've given you of the quad. So that's, you know, ringing part of our quad there. And there's Lynn Kilchenstein, who was one of the presidents for about 10 years. And she was really important. She's amazing in what she was able to develop at the campus, and you'll see that. So in a different tack, what happens is the Community College System of New Hampshire is established in 2007. That's not that long ago when you think about it. So the history of the community colleges in New Hampshire is really kind of odd because they were these 7 separate institutions, and then they combined 6 of them into 3 institutions. So there were 3 institutions plus NHTI. So for example, River Valley and Nashua were run by Lucille Jordan, who recently passed and ran that college for 28 years. And then they broke those colleges apart again, and then they bring the Community College System of New Hampshire together. And then we kind of were very, very independent for a number of years, each of the colleges doing our own thing. And now we're collaborating again and coalescing again and trying to figure out how do we work as 7 colleges to solve New Hampshire's problems. So for example, Lakes has culinary, and people say to me, Patrick, you need to start a culinary program. Not going to happen. Why? Lakes has it. We don't need to duplicate that program. It's a very, very expensive program. That's their expertise. That's what they're really good at. We don't want to take students away from Lakes and bring them into NHTI and have 2 programs that aren't sustainable. So we're doing much more collaboration for the good of New Hampshire there. This is an important moment when NHTI becomes NHTI Concords Community College. So we were fondly known as the Tech. And when I moved to Concord, I was really impressed when people would talk to me about the Tech. They would talk about it affectionately and reverentially. Like, wow, the Tech, that's the place. That's Concord's community college. It was a technical school, and what we needed to become for New Hampshire and the other 6 community colleges needed to become We're comprehensive community colleges. And a comprehensive community college means that we offer college transfer, we offer career technical education degrees and certificates, and we offer workforce development, and we offer continuing education, and we offer what used to be called developmental education. And so that's students who maybe didn't pay so much attention in high school, right? But they have some talent and now they need to kind of get college ready, or maybe they've been out of school for a number of years. And so one of our excellences, and we were just talking tonight at our open house about this, one of our excellences, we don't ask you, what have you done? Where have you come from? What can you do? We ask, what are you trying to do? And then we find out where you are, and our goal is to get you where you're going. That is a very different mission from the universities. The university says, have you met these criteria, whether it's an SAT score or GPA or the courses you took in high school, did you take calculus, things like that. We'll have students, we were just talking about it today in our architectural engineering technology program. We'll have students who want to be architects or architectural engineers who didn't have math in high school or didn't do that well in math in high school. That doesn't mean they can't be in that program. It means that we have to find out what's the math that they know, what do we need to give them so that they can achieve that goal. And so this was also, I'm told, very controversial. NHTI was revered in Concord, and it was revered by the faculty and by the students and the alumni, and they were very against changing the name. And so it was going to become something like Concord's Community College, and people were like, heck no, not going to happen. So the compromise was NHTI, Concord's Community College, and I'm so glad that they made that decision because I think it's important to hold that heritage, and I think it helps with our branding because folks know what NHTI is. And it's interesting, you'll see New Hampshire Technical Institute appear in different places. You might see it in the paper, you might see it in a flyer. I get a thing in the mail about a seminar that's being held at the college, and it says being held at New Hampshire Technical Institute, right? Well, that's not really our name. And some folks have wanted us to move away from the tech, but if you want to call us the tech, I'm fine with that. I'm just fine with that. That's part of our heritage. The Sycamore Community Gardens is started in 2009, and there was a community garden out on Clinton Street, but it was hard to get to. You had to have a car to get there, and it didn't have water. So Ruth Heath, who was one of our employees, collaborated with others in the community, and it was somebody from the Concord Monitor, and they came to us and they said, hey, we want to start a community garden. We see you got some bottom land that's not being used. Could we have that? And so their vision and their energy builds that. That's really important because that garden serves what we call, and I love this, that we call this in New Hampshire, New Americans, the New American community. So these are people who are coming from other countries, oftentimes refugees, and many of these folks are coming from countries in places that have crops that are very different from the crops that we have in America, but they want their spices and they want they want to be able to cook their native meals. A good friend of mine, he has 4 plots there, and he grows corn, and he tells me it's the kind of corn his kids won't eat because it's not the sweet corn that we have, right? But he and his family, his wife and his extended family, they revere that corn, and that corn you can understand, like just like us, like at Christmas time or Easter, the ceremonial foods that we make, those things that Grandma has always made, and we know it's Easter because we're eating that thing. Well, that's the case there, and so it started small, and they've continued to grow, and they want to continue with us, and they have some vision for the future. We also, in our agriculture program, we have what's called a high tunnel, which is basically a greenhouse. And so in there, we have the folks can start their crops in the winter, right? They can seed them, and then they can transplant them into the garden when the climate gets more temperate. This is Grapponi Hall, and this is one of the things that really impresses me about President Kilchenstein, because she marshals resources in the area to raise $20 million to build Grapponi Hall. Have to call out the Grapponi family. Beverly Grapponi, you may know, was a nurse, And so this became our nursing center. They seeded it with $20,000 to kick off the capital campaign, and they eventually donate $1 million to the 20 million. And it was designed by one of our students. He graduated from our architectural engineering technology program. And it's a gorgeous building. That building is where one of those parking lots was that I had pointed to earlier. So here you see the college as it is now. And so again, here's Little Hall, right? And there is McCrory and Farnham. And so there's the Wellness Center. And over there is North Hall and Police Standards and Training. And the Rocket is the Discovery Center. And then our athletic fields around there. The athletic fields was a wonderful partnership with Seacoast United. And the visionaries at Seacoast and at NHTI, they recognized that we need places for our athletes to be able to play. We need home fields, right? But Concord also needs playing fields, and Seacoast needs playing fields. And so we had a partnership where Seacoast helped invest in that. We also worked with the conservation to create a conservation easement. That's where the boat landing comes from, and all that land. Most of that land is conserved, can't be built on, but I think we got 5 soccer fields, a baseball diamond, a softball field, cross-country track. All of that comes through that wonderful partnership, and all of that was all cornfields, and all that land is developed beautifully. So now we're into the 2010s, and Susan Dutton was president. NHTI gets a national rank, and we'll talk about that. Dual admission, we have our 50th anniversary, and Gretchen Mullen-Sawinski was also president during that time. So in a Brookings Institution ranking, we were ranked #1 as a value-added 2-year college. And so what they did was they look at your demographics and the inputs and what the expected outputs are, and then they look at the student earnings and their jobs, and they look at that gap. And that gap where NHTI takes those students to where they go is so large that we're named #1 in the country. And that continues to be our mission. We're an incredible value. You think about a nurse that comes to our program, right? And she's paying $7,000 a year for her education plus supplies. So she's, for tuition, he or she is in for $14,000, $15,000, and they're coming out, what are they making, right? $70,000. Look at the electronics engineering technology graduates. They can have whatever job they want. And these are really good jobs. A student wrote an email to Professor Jeff Beltramo, who's in mechanical engineering technology, and he said something that really, really struck me. He talked about how the professor took this clay and inspired it and molded it and told him, you can do this, you can be something. Pursue this, you're going to achieve. And to the young man's a little bit of surprise and delight, he does. And he writes this email afterwards, and he thanks the professor for all that. And he says, you have changed my future family tree. Think about that, right? So when that person comes from a family that is not making a lot of money, and maybe they're not in a skilled trade, and they become a nurse, they become an electronic engineering technologist, they've changed that entire family, right? And so now their children have a different standard of living than they had. And those children are going to have children who will have a different standard of living, all for $7,000 a year. And that's the joy of being able to work there. Anybody recognize this suspicious character? Yep, it's Ali Sakou, who is, Concord City Councilor and just an amazing human being. Ali's a new American. And he comes to America and he doesn't speak the language, and he wants higher education and he can't afford it, and he needs access to it. And somebody tells him about NHTI. Go to NHTI. You can get those first 2 years. It's going to be affordable, and then you can transfer, and we have English as a other language program to work with new Americans so that they can do that. And then Ali becomes a star alumni, a star student. He was in Student Senate, and now what he does for the city of Concord and what he did for the Islamic Center. You know, he takes over that church. I think it was a congregational church, and has that renovated and becomes a really, really important cultural religious center for us here in Concord. And the dual admission program begins, which is a dual admission to NHTI and to the University System of New Hampshire. So you're accepted to both of them. We have pathways, we have co-advising, so we can get you when you first come in. Here's where you're going, here's the path to get there. It's a really good partnership. We have over 100 articulation agreements with the University System of New Hampshire. And then in the 2020s, this is when we turn 60, and this suspicious character, Patrick Tompkins, is appointed. And this is the era of pandemic learning. And so the Child Care Center, this is when the Child Care Center is leased to the Boys and Girls Club. So there's pandemic era learning. One of my favorite parts of McCrory Hall is they have two hallways. One where they have the photos of the dental assisting grads, and the other part of the hallway, they have photos of the dental hygienist grads. And it's really cool to go back and look at the ones that are graduating from the 70s, right? And what they're wearing, you know, just the garb, the clinical garb, but also like the glasses and the hairstyles and things like that. In 2020, there's no picture because it's the pandemic and we didn't bring folks together for the shot. One of the interesting things and important developments in higher education in America in the last 20 years is the development of online learning. This allows folks to access education who may not be able to access it for other reasons. So what if you need one of our programs, but you don't live in Concord and you're not able to do dorm living for whatever reason? This gives you access. What if you're a shift worker? Sometimes first responders have these shifts that move, right? They're on first shift for 3 weeks, and then they're on second, and then they're on third, so they can't take an evening class because they're going to be working at some point in that evening class. Online education provides that access. It's not right for everyone, and it's a challenge, and many students, prior to the pandemic, many of our students say, I don't want online. And many of our faculty say, I don't want to teach online, and it's regarded as lesser, that it's not as high quality an academic experience, that you don't have the contact with the faculty, you don't have the contact with the other students, maybe you're not getting the richness. The pandemic actually helped us with that because everything went online. And what folks found out in the pandemic, you know what, we can do this. You can learn, you can teach, you can learn. And so what we find is our students now make different decisions. Most of our online students are our on-campus students. And what they'll say is, I'll take English online, I want to be in the classroom for math, right? They're choosing, they know which ones they do. If they're doing our nursing programs, those are in-person classes, right? They're clinical experiences. You got to be there and working with the drugs and the needles and things like that. But there are didactic portions, and they have to take English, and they have to take math, and they have to take biology. They can access some of those classes online, which allows them to work. Most of our students, the vast majority of our students work. Our students, in terms of employment, coming to us are of three types. Most of them come because they want a job. That's why they come to us. I want to be a nurse, I want to be a welder, that type of thing. Most of them already are working parents, but high school graduates as well. And most of them will change jobs while they're with us. And a lot of those job changes are because of the education they're getting in NHTI. They take a class in Excel, Microsoft Excel, right? So they learn a little bit more about computers, and now they're more marketable. They can put that on their resume, and when the employer interviews, can you do this? Yes, I can do that, even before they get their degree. So online learning is an important part of what we do. It's growing, and right now, the Community College System of New Hampshire is in the process of aggregating all of our online courses and all of our online programs, and we're going to try to create a hub so wherever you are in New Hampshire, you have access to all of those online courses. Right now, if you want to access online courses, You might go on our website and say, they don't have that course online. Well, River Valley might have it online, but you don't know it because you can't see it. So we're going to try to bring all of that together, and we're going to try to, some of those classes we have difficulty staffing. We had one just tonight where we have 10 students in the class and we don't have an instructor. Another college has 1 student in the class and they have the instructor. So now we're working together, and both that's 1 student and the 10 are being served, and we can share the instructor. And so that's the benefit. Here's a snapshot of enrollment, only going back to 1980. There's a couple of really important things to note here. One of those is, notice how female heavy we are. And that's a real change in higher education in America. If you go back, you saw that first graduating class, right? It's 24 dudes. And here you can already see by 1980, the women are outnumbering the men. And then look over here in 2010, that huge difference between women and men. And then you can look at that gap narrowing. 2 things I'll say about that. One is that, in my opinion, this is an editorial, we should be concerned about young men in America. Young women in America are looking for opportunity, they're looking for education, they understand that the future of their well-being and the well-being of their family comes through post-secondary education and getting a marketable skill. We have too many young men who are graduating from high school to the couch, right? Or to a job that doesn't have much of a future. They're young, right? They're strong, but after you're a bricklayer, when you're in your 50s, that's hard work to sustain at that age. What is that future? And young men, for some reason, are becoming disgruntled with education in America. We have a lot of work to do to bring those young men back into the fold and to diagnose what is the reason. Why are those young men alienated? Why don't they? So think about that 1965 class and the first graduating class in 66. These are young men who say, there's my future. I'm going there because that's what I need for myself and that's what I need for my family. And we have young men all throughout New Hampshire who, when they're at Thanksgiving and grandma says, so what are you going to do, Tom? And they say, I don't know. I guess I'll just keep the job at the grocery store or whatever it is. And I grew up in grocery stores. I put myself through college working in grocery stores. So that's a fine work to have. But for many of those folks, they're low-skilled jobs, right? The cashier, the bagger, those are pretty low-skilled jobs. What's that future? And we need to, in my opinion, we need to figure out how to close that gap. The other important thing is in 2010, you're going to see that our enrollment is 4556. That is the high watermark of our enrollment. Can you guess why enrollment peaks in 2010? Something happens in those years. It's actually before 2010. Something happens in America that causes our enrollment to peak. The recession. The Great Recession. So we are counter-cyclical. Community colleges are counter-cyclical. When the economy's good, our enrollment goes down. They have jobs. When the economy goes down and unemployment goes up, they come back to us because they need to reskill. That job has gone away. And there are often training dollars available to the unemployed, and they're able to put some of those training dollars to work. And so it's interesting, when we go from 4556 and we're down to about 3,600 now, that has created significant problems for NHTI in terms of budget and in terms of maintaining our campus. But it's also a good story for New Hampshire because it means our economy's strong. The other thing you know very well, because you read the same sources I do, the high school population is declining. It's leveling off and declining, and so we're not growing in that area. So we don't have this rising number of high school graduates that we saw in the baby boom generation, right? So these growing, when they built my high school in the 70s, it was for 4,000 students, right? Because that area is just exploding. And we're seeing that the native-born population in America is kind of leveling off, and most of our population growth is coming from immigration. And so we're feeling that at NHTI, and that's causing several problems. Two that I'll just quickly summarize. One is finances. So you know how it is. If you have a house that's 3,000 square feet, right? And you raised your family in there, but now it's just you and your partner, that's a very big house and it's hard to take care of when you get older, right? Also, what happens if you have a house that has a $3,000 mortgage and you've got this great job and now you have a different job or you're retiring, you no longer have $3,000 a month? How do you sustain that house? Even if you can pay the mortgage, can you keep the roof up? Can you fix the furnace? Those are the financial problems we're facing at NHTI. And so what we're trying to do is be entrepreneurial and figure out partnerships with other organizations. So leasing our Farnham Hall to USNH is one of those partnerships. It uses that space. It brings in revenue for us that we're able to put towards operating. The partnership with the Mountain Kings helps our housing budget. So as our dorm population has shrank, the costs are still the same because we still need 24/7 security, and that's very expensive, right? But we don't have 350 students supporting that. We have 140 students supporting that, but the costs are still the same. By partnering with the Mountain Kings, that's helping to subsidize that. So the one part is the budget, and then the other part is square footage. We have more square footage than we need, and some of our square footage, like Farnham Hall, that needed renovation. It needed a new roof, and the interior needed to be renovated, and the capital dollars just aren't there in New Hampshire. They're very hard to come by because there are a lot of capital needs in New Hampshire. So that innovative partnership of the system of New Hampshire and of the community college system and of NHTI allows us to repurpose those spaces. And beneficially, it brings more people to campus and expose them to the opportunities that are there. So this is the last slide. This is our 60th anniversary. We had a wonderful picnic out there. And as I said, we had folks from every decade of the college. So I really appreciate you letting me come and spend some time with you and to share the history of this really great college in New Hampshire. Thank you, thank you.
Let's see if there's any questions.
Yes.
Back to that.
Okay, this is more of comments than questions. You think I've talked long enough, tell me to shut up for a while and I'll come back later. The first thing is, you're talking about the number of two-year schools. I would have said that, back in the 1800s, the country was full of two-year schools. They called them normal schools for teachers because that was, what you went to college for teaching. So, I would say that the two-year schools are very historic in this country. The second thing has to do with that missile I have at the Discovery Center. That's fake. That's fiberglass. They were offered a genuine missile. The town of Warren had a genuine original missile on the town green. And, it's kind of getting older, maybe it'll fall over someday. They didn't really want it anymore. And so, the McCullough Center was going to get it. But apparently it turned out to be too expensive to remove and transport it. It's cheaper to build a fiberglass. If you want to see a real missile, go up to the town of Warren. That's where you see the real.
That's really cool. You mentioned the normal schools. Well, America's remarkable in public education. The first school in America is in 1635 in Massachusetts, right? And then Harvard College is the first higher education institution is to train ministers. Harvard's older, and it's named after John Harvard because he donated his book collection. So that becomes the library. In the post-Civil War era, there is the Land Grant Act that's passed, and that's where we get our technical colleges, our four-year ag schools. And land is set aside in every state for an agricultural technical four-year school. And then, as you said, we have the normal schools, which are training teachers. And many of those normal schools now are four-year universities.
But anyway, a little bit about my credentials. I was an extension student in the 70s. I remember Bill Simon, he was a tennis player, very expert. But when it came time for this name change, at that time the distributed schools were called vocational technical colleges. And then there was the New Hampshire Technical Institute. And so, like you say, there was a big force to change this. And basically the faculty wanted to be a community college. because it's more prestigious to be a college professor. Whereas the students thought our community college means watered down education. They wanted it to be a technical institute. And so that's where this compromise.
It depends on the faculty. That name, New Hampshire Technical Institute, was beloved by the faculty. Beloved. And there were many of them that opposed it. And also, there were some of them that opposed it being a community college. They did not want to be a comprehensive community college because they didn't want that caliber of student. The Technical Institute was a really high-end education, right? And you had to have some real skills to get in there and to succeed. And the community college, as I said earlier, we take everybody. And so that was a change in our mission. And that wasn't popular with everybody. It was some, but not with everybody.
But it happens, I just today read that report in an ancient newspaper about where NHTI was #1 in the country. And the reason for it was that at that time they still had over 40% of their students were in engineering. And another big whack were in healthcare. And those were, occupations that paid really good money if you got out. And that's how they shone over and above all of the community colleges, which, the community colleges in other states, a lot of them were, a watered down liberal arts education for 2 years and then go do something as compared to, theoretically, the New Hampshire Technical Institute only offered programs that people would highly graduate from.
Yeah, that's not quite accurate. Most community colleges in America were established with a combination of career technical education and transfer education. And many, I come from Virginia, the community colleges were the vocational technical schools that became community colleges. So that mission changed from just vocational technical education, get a skill, get a job, to a much more comprehensive mission.
Well, that's as I say, what happened here. They used to be vocational technical colleges, now they're calling them community colleges.
Yeah.
But the reason that NHTI got their #1 rank was they still had such a very high percentage of people in the engineering and the healthcare, and fewer in the comprehensive education wing.
Yeah, very true.
And then the last story kind of relates to that originally the road that went through the campus was called Fan Road.
Yes.
And the reason for that was that at one time, that was entirely agricultural fields because of the floodplain. You had your house downtown, and then you walked out to your field, and that way if a flood came, it wouldn't get your house. And the lots were fan-shaped, so they called it Fan Road.
Fan shaped like that.
But then after a while, when it became the New Hampshire Technical Institute, they changed the name to Institute Drive.
Some of the folks at NHTI still call it Fan Road.
Okay, but
I didn't know that history. That's really cool.
But if you look on older maps, you'll see that there's this Institute Drive
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah. And that road was changed. It was realigned.
Oh yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah.
It's much further than it used to be. It was much
Yeah.
nicer before.
And it still floods, right? It's still floodplain. And when we get heavy rains, our soccer fields, the lower soccer fields flood. The Sycamore Garden floods, which is actually a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Because the flood comes in, brings the silt,
Yeah.
enriches the soil.
But that road now, of course, is College Drive. Because when you went from the Technical Institute to Concord Community College, they changed the road to College Drive.
That is excellent history. I didn't know any of that. That's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And if there are any more questions, come on up and Patrick will be glad to answer.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, thank you all for coming tonight. Remember, second Thursday, we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.